The girl couldn't have been more than 12. She knelt in the dirt outside Timber Ridge's old livestock yard, her hands tied behind her back with frayed rope, her dress torn at the shoulder and caked with dust. Her face was turned down, hidden beneath a tangle of dark hair, but her shoulders shook, not from crying, but from the effort of holding it in. Beside her, smaller, maybe 8 years old, sat another girl, same dark hair, same hollow eyes, but this one wasn't shaking. She was still, too still, the kind of stillness that comes when you've learned that moving only makes it worse. Cord Brennan had ridden into town for fence wire and salt licks. That was all. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't looking for anything except to get back to his ranch before the sky opened up with the storm that had been threatening all morning. But when he heard the auctioneer's voice cutting through the wind, sharp and practiced, something in his chest tightened. "Next lot," the man called out, gesturing lazily toward the 2 girls kneeling in the dirt. Sisters, healthy, young enough to train proper, no family, no papers, start the bid at $20 for the pair. Cord stopped walking. The crowd, if you could call it that, was small. A handful of men in worn hats and dusty boots, a few leaning against the fence with their arms crossed, watching like this was just another Tuesday. No one looked surprised. No one looked angry. That was the worst part. Cord's hand tightened around the leather reins in his fist. His horse, a gray mare named Ash, shifted behind him, sensing the tension in his grip. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a thin mustache and a voice like gravel, tapped his cane against the wooden platform. "Come now, gentlemen, 2 for the price of 1. The older one's got some fight left, but the little one," he grinned, "quiet as a church mouse, won't give you a lick of trouble." Cord's jaw clenched. The older girl, the one whose shoulders were still shaking, lifted her head just slightly, not enough to meet anyone's eyes, just enough to glance at her sister. And then she whispered, barely audible over the wind, "Sir, I'll be strong for my sister." Not a plea, not a cry for help. A promise. Cord's boots hit the dirt before he even realized he'd moved. "Hold on," he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The auctioneer turned, his grin fading into something sharper. "You bidding, friend?" Cord didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, his eyes moving from the auctioneer to the 2 girls kneeling in the dirt. The older one had lifted her head a little more now, and Cord could see her face clearly for the first time. Thin, pale, bruised along her jaw. But her eyes, dark and sharp, were watching him with something that looked like hope fighting against the weight of too many broken promises. "I'm asking a question first," Cord said, his voice steady. "Who's selling them?" The auctioneer's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's not how this works, friend. You bid, you buy, you move on. Questions don't lower the price." "I didn't ask about the price," Cord said. "I asked who's selling them." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. One of the men leaning against the fence spat into the dirt and shook his head. "Strangers got a mouth on him." The auctioneer's smile thinned. Their uncle, legal guardian, signed the papers himself, all above board. "Where is he?" "Not here, doesn't need to be. Papers are filed with the county clerk." Cord's eyes narrowed. "What county?" The auctioneer's grin disappeared entirely. "You buying or leaving?" Cord glanced at the girls again. The older one was still watching him, her breathing shallow, her bound hands trembling behind her back. The younger one hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. $50, Cord said quietly. The auctioneer blinked. "What?" "50 for both." The crowd went silent. The auctioneer recovered quickly, his grin creeping back. "Well now, that's more like it. $50 for the pair, going once." "Wait!" The voice came from the older girl. Everyone turned. She was staring at Cord now, her eyes wide, her voice shaking but firm. "Why?" Cord met her gaze. "Because you shouldn't be here." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." The girl's lips pressed into a thin line. Her sister finally moved, just slightly, leaning closer to her. The auctioneer banged his cane against the platform. $50, going once, going twice. Sold, Cord said. The auctioneer pointed at him. Cash, now. Cord reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out the bills slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving the auctioneer's face. When he handed over the money, the man snatched it quickly, stuffing it into his vest pocket. Pleasure doing business, the auctioneer said, his grin back in full force. Girls are yours, ropes included. Cord didn't respond. He walked past the auctioneer, past the N still leaning against the fence, and knelt in the dirt in front of the two girls. Up close he could see more. The older girl's wrists were raw where the rope had dug in. The younger one had a bruise on her cheek, faint but unmistakable. Cord pulled a knife from his belt. The older girl flinched. Easy, Cord said softly. I'm cutting the ropes, that's all. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Cord reached behind her and sliced through the frayed rope in one clean motion. Her hands fell to her sides, and she gasped, rubbing her wrists. He moved to the younger girl next. She didn't flinch, didn't react at all, just stared straight ahead, her small hands limp in her lap. When the rope fell away, Cord stood and stepped back. Can you walk? He asked. The older girl nodded slowly. She reached down and took her sister's hand, pulling her to her feet. The younger one swayed slightly, but stayed upright. Cord gestured toward his horse. We're leaving. The older girl didn't move. Where? My ranch, 4 miles west. And then what? Cord looked at her, really looked at her, at the bruises, at the exhaustion in her eyes, at the way her hand gripped her sister's so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Then you rest, he said, and tomorrow we figure out what comes next. The girl's eyes searched his face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Cord turned and started walking toward the edge of the yard, the two girls following close behind. Behind them, the auctioneer called out, already moving on to the next lot. The crowd went back to watching. And the wind picked up, carrying the first drops of rain. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Cord had lifted the younger girl onto Ash's back, and the older one walked beside him, her hand still gripping her sister's ankle like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. The rain started in earnest halfway through, cold and sharp, but none of them spoke. When they reached the ranch, a low-slung cabin with a barn and a few scattered corrals, Cord led them inside without a word. He started a fire in the stone hearth, set a kettle on to boil, and pulled 2 blankets from a chest in the corner. He handed them to the older girl. She took them, but didn't move. There's a room in the back, Cord said, nodding toward a narrow door. Bed's clean, you can sleep there tonight. The girl didn't move. What's your name? Cord Brennan. I'm Eliza, she said. This is my sister, Me. Me still hadn't spoken. She stood close to Eliza, her small frame hidden beneath the blanket Cord had draped over her shoulders. Eliza, Cord repeated. Me. Eliza's eyes narrowed slightly. You didn't answer my question earlier. Which one? Why? Cord exhaled slowly. He crouched by the fire, adding another log, watching the flames catch and grow. Because I've seen what happens to girls sold at auctions like that, and I've seen what happens to the men who buy them. And you're different. Cord looked up at her. I didn't buy you to own you. Eliza's jaw tightened. Everyone says that. Maybe. So what makes you different? Cord stood, brushing the ash from his hands. I guess you'll have to decide that for yourself. Eliza stared at him for a long moment. Then she glanced at me, who was watching the fire with empty eyes. We don't have anywhere else to go, Eliza said quietly. I know. Our uncle, she stopped, her voice catching. He's not our uncle, not really. He married our mother after our father died. Then she got sick, and when she passed, he said we were his responsibility, but he didn't want us. He just wanted. She stopped again, her hands trembling. Cord's expression didn't change, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. You don't have to tell me. He sold us, Eliza said, her voice breaking. He signed papers and sold us like we were cattle. Me finally moved. She turned and buried her face in Eliza's side, and Eliza wrapped her arms around her, holding her tight. Cord watched them for a moment. Then he turned and walked to the window, staring out at the rain. There's something you should know, he said quietly. Eliza looked up. What? Cord didn't turn around. 8 years ago, I worked as a deputy in a town called Redstone, about 50 miles east of here. Eliza went still. There was a family there, Cord continued. A mother, a father, 2 little girls. The father ran a dry goods store, good man, honest, but he got on the wrong side of some men who wanted his land. Eliza's breathing quickened. One night those men came to his store. They set it on fire. The father died trying to get his family out. The mother was badly burned. She died 2 days later. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. How do you know this? Cord finally turned to face her. Because I was there. Eliza's eyes widened. I was 19, Cord said, just a deputy. I heard the screams and ran to the store, but by the time I got there, the fire was too far gone. I pulled the mother out, but she was already... He stopped, his jaw tight. There were 2 girls inside. I got them out, gave them to a neighbor, told them to take care of them until I could figure out what to do. Eliza's hands dropped to her sides. But I didn't, Cord said. I let the neighbor handle it. I let the county take over. I was young, and I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that someone else would step in. His voice dropped. I didn't know the neighbor sold them to your stepfather. I didn't know he lied about being their uncle. I didn't know until today, when I saw you in that yard. Eliza's face had gone pale. You're the man who pulled us out. Cord nodded slowly. I don't remember you, Eliza whispered. You were 4, me was an infant. Eliza's legs buckled, and she sank to her knees, still holding me. You left us. I did. You left us, and we ended up, her voice broke. We ended up here. I know. Eliza looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. You think buying us back makes it better? No. You think giving us a blanket and a bed makes up for 8 years? No. Eliza's voice rose. Then what are you doing? Cord crouched down in front of her, his voice steady. I'm trying to do what I should have done 8 years ago. Eliza stared at him, her chest heaving. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Cord said. I'm not asking for anything, but I'm telling you right now, you and me are safe here, and I'm not leaving you again. Eliza's hands trembled. Me pulled back slightly, looking up at her sister with wide, frightened eyes. Sir, Eliza whispered, her voice breaking, I'll be strong for my sister. Cord shook his head. You don't have to be strong, not anymore. Eliza's face crumpled, and for the first time since the auction, she let herself cry. Me clung to her, and Cord stayed where he was, kneeling in front of them, his jaw tight. After a long moment, he reached out slowly, giving Eliza time to pull away, and rested a hand on her shoulder. I've got you both, he said quietly, always. Eliza didn't pull away. And outside, the rain fell harder. 3 days passed. Eliza and me stayed in the back room. Cord didn't push them to talk, didn't ask questions. He cooked simple meals, beans, bread, eggs from the henhouse, and left plates outside their door. Sometimes Eliza came out and ate with him by the fire. Sometimes she didn't. Me never came out alone. On the 4th morning, Cord was mending a fence post near the barn when he heard the sound of hoofbeats. He straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle leaning against the barn wall. 3 riders crested the hill. Cord recognized the man in front immediately. Sheriff Orville Kern, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a silver star pinned to his vest. He'd been sheriff of Timber Ridge for 6 years, and in that time, he'd built a reputation for keeping the peace, no matter what that peace cost. The two men riding beside him were hired hands. Cord didn't know their names, but he knew the type. Hard eyes, hands that rested too close to their guns. Kern reined his horse to a stop a few feet from Cord. He didn't dismount, just looked down at him with a faint smile. "Cord Brennan," Kern said, "heard you made a purchase in town a few days back." Cord didn't move. "News travels." "It does." Kern leaned forward in his saddle. "Heard you bought 2 girls from an auction. That true?" "It is." "Mind if I ask why?" "I do, actually." Kern's smile didn't waver. "See, here's the thing, Cord. The man who sold those girls, he's filed a complaint." Cord's eyes narrowed. "What kind of complaint?" "Says you threatened him. Says you took the girls without proper transfer of ownership." "I paid $50 in front of a dozen witnesses." "He says you didn't sign the paperwork." Cord's jaw tightened. "There wasn't any paperwork." "Well, that's the problem, isn't it?" Kern straightened in his saddle. "Man says those girls are still his legal wards. Says you stole them." "That's a lie." "Maybe it is, maybe it isn't." Kern's smile faded. "Either way, I'm here to bring them back." Cord's hand moved closer to the rifle. "You're not taking them anywhere." One of the hired hands shifted in his saddle, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. Kern held up a hand, stopping him. "Easy, boys. Cord's just confused, aren't you, Cord?" Cord didn't answer. Kern leaned forward again. "Let me make this simple. You hand over the girls. I take them back to their legal guardian. You avoid a charge of kidnapping. Everyone walks away clean." "Their guardian sold them," Cord said, his voice low, "at an illegal auction, 4 years after the war ended slavery." Kern's expression didn't change. "You got proof it was illegal." "You got proof it wasn't." Kern's smile returned, cold and thin. "I got a signed statement from their guardian. I got witnesses who say you caused a scene, and I got 2 men with me who'll testify you resisted lawful authority." He paused. "What have you got, Cord?" Cord's hand closed around the rifle. "Don't," Kern said softly. "You pull that rifle, and this ends bad for everyone." Behind Cord, the cabin door creaked open. Eliza stepped out onto the porch, me behind her, clutching her sister's skirt. Kern's eyes moved to them, and his smile widened. "There they are." Eliza's face went pale, but she didn't move. Cord stepped sideways, placing himself between the riders and the porch. "Eliza, go back inside." "No," Eliza said, her voice shaking but firm. Kern chuckled. "Smart girl, she knows how this works." "She's not going with you," Cord said. "That's not your call." "It's not yours either." Kern's smile disappeared. "I'm giving you one more chance, Brennan. Hand them over, or I arrest you for obstruction and kidnapping. Your choice." Cord's grip on the rifle tightened. And then Eliza spoke. "Sheriff Kern." Kern turned to her, his expression patient. "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you know who our stepfather is?" Kern blinked. "That's not." "Do you know who he is?" Eliza repeated, louder this time. Kern hesitated. "I know he's your legal guardian." "His name is Samuel Dockery," Eliza said. "He runs the land office in Redstone. He's the one who approved the seizure of our father's property after he died. He's the one who sold it to a cattle company 2 weeks later." Kern's jaw tightened. "He didn't marry our mother because he loved her," Eliza continued, her voice steady now. "He married her to take everything she had left, and when she died, he sold us because we were the last thing standing between him and a clear profit." Kern's hand moved to his belt. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." Kern stared at her for a long moment, then he looked at Cord. "Doesn't change the law." "Maybe not," Cord said, "but it changes what I'm willing to let you do." Kern's eyes darkened. "You threatening me?" "No, I'm telling you." The 2 men locked eyes. One of the hired hands shifted again, his hand still on his gun. And then, from the hill behind them, a voice called out. "Sheriff Kern." Everyone turned. An older man on horseback was riding toward them, his hat pulled low against the wind. Behind him, two more riders followed. Cord recognized them immediately. Ranch hands from the neighboring property, men he'd worked with years ago. The older man, a weathered cowboy named Eli Thorne, reined his horse to a stop beside Kern. "Problem here, Eli?" Kern asked, his voice tight. Eli looked at Cord, then at the girls on the porch, then back at Kern. "Heard you were riding out this way, thought I'd check in." "This doesn't concern you." "Maybe not," Eli said, "but Cord's been a good neighbor for a long time, and I don't much like the idea of lawmen showing up 3-to-1 on a man's property without a damn good reason." Kern's jaw clenched. "I got a warrant." "Let's see it." Kern didn't move. Eli smiled faintly. "That's what I thought." The tension hung in the air like smoke. Finally, Kern turned his horse. "This isn't over, Brennan." "I know," Cord said. Kern rode off, his two men following. Eli stayed behind, watching them go. Then he turned to Cord. "You all right?" Cord nodded slowly. "For now." Eli glanced at the porch. "Those the girls?" "Yeah." Eli tipped his hat toward Eliza. "Ma'am." Eliza didn't respond. Eli looked back at Cord. "You need help, you let me know." "I will." Eli rode off, and Cord stood in the dirt for a long moment, watching the horizon. Behind him, Eliza finally spoke. "He'll be back." Cord turned. "I know." "What are we going to do?" Cord met her eyes. "We're going to be ready." That night, Cord sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. Eliza sat across from him, me curled up beside her, asleep with her head in Eliza's lap. The cabin was quiet, except for the crackle of the flames and the soft rhythm of me's breathing. "You didn't have to do that today," Eliza said after a long silence. Cord looked up. "Do what?" "Stand between us and the sheriff." Cord returned his attention to the rifle. "Yeah, I did. You could have just handed us over, saved yourself the trouble." "That's not how this works." Eliza's voice dropped. "How what works?" Cord set the rifle aside and met her eyes. "I told you, I'm not leaving you again." Eliza looked down at me, her hand resting gently on her sister's hair. "She hasn't spoken since the auction." Cord's expression softened. "She will when she's ready." "What if she's not? What if?" Eliza's voice broke. "What if I can't help her?" Cord leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You've been helping her since the day you were born. You think I don't see that?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't stop him, our stepfather. I tried, but I couldn't." "Eliza," Cord said gently, "you were 12 years old. You were a child." "I should have done more." "You did everything you could." Eliza shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I promised her I'd keep her safe, and I couldn't." Cord stood and crossed to her side. He knelt down, his voice steady. "You did keep her safe. You're still keeping her safe. You think anyone else could have done what you did?" Eliza looked at him, her face wet with tears. "I'm so tired." "I know. I don't know how to stop being afraid." Cord reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder, just like he had 3 nights ago. "You don't have to stop, you just have to keep going." Eliza closed her eyes, and for a moment she let herself lean into his hand. "Sir," she whispered, "you don't have to call me that." "What should I call you?" "Cord's fine." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Cord." He nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning low. Then Me stirred, her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at Eliza, then at Cord. Cord smiled gently. "Hey there, Me." Me didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Cord reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved horse, no bigger than his thumb. "I made this a long time ago, for my niece, but she's all grown up now, doesn't need it anymore. He held it out to me. Me stared at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Her small fingers closed around the carving, and she pulled it close to her chest. Eliza's breath caught. Me looked up at Cord, and then, in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, she said, "Thank you." Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. Cord's throat tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "You're welcome, Me." Me looked down at the carving, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Then she looked back at Cord. "Are you going to leave us?" Cord shook his head. "No." "Promise." "I promise." Me held the carving tighter. Then she leaned back against Eliza, her eyes already drifting closed again. Eliza looked at Cord, her face filled with something that looked like hope. "She spoke," Eliza whispered. Cord nodded. "She did." Eliza's hand found Me's, and she held it gently. Maybe we'll be okay." Cord stood and returned to his seat by the fire. "You will be." Eliza watched him for a moment, then she said, "Cord." "Yes." "If you're listening to this story right now, wherever you are, I want you to think about something." She paused. "What would you have done? If you were the one who saw us in that yard, would you have walked away, or would you have stopped?" Cord looked at her, confused. Eliza smiled faintly. "Just something I've been thinking about." Cord didn't respond, but he held her gaze for a long moment before turning back to the fire. Outside, the wind had died down. And inside, for the first time in a long time, the cabin felt like a home. Sheriff Kern returned 5 days later. But this time, he wasn't alone. Cord heard them coming before he saw them, the sound of hoofbeats, too many to count. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, and watched as a line of riders crested the hill. Kern was at the front, his face set in a hard line. But behind him, something was different. Eli Thorne rode just behind the sheriff, along with a dozen other men, ranch hands, storekeepers, farmers, men Cord had worked with over the years, men who knew him. Kern reined his horse to a stop and dismounted. He walked toward Cord slowly, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Brennan," Kern said. "Sheriff." Kern glanced at the men behind him, then back at Cord. "I brought witnesses." "I see that." "And a warrant, a real one this time." Cord's jaw tightened. "For what?" "For the return of 2 minors to their legal guardian." Eli Thorne dismounted and stepped forward. "Sheriff, can I see that warrant?" Kern turned, his expression darkening. "This doesn't concern you, Eli." "It does if you're arresting my neighbor." Kern's hand moved closer to his pistol. "Stand down." "No." The other men dismounted, forming a loose line behind Eli. Kern looked at them, his eyes narrowing. "You're all interfering with the law." "Then show us the law," Eli said calmly. "Show us the paperwork that says those girls belong to Samuel Dockery." Kern hesitated. One of the ranch hands, a younger man named Tom, stepped forward. "I was at that auction, Sheriff. I saw the whole thing. There wasn't any paperwork. Dockery didn't even show up, just had that auctioneer running the sale." Another man spoke up. "I know Dockery, worked for him 2 years ago. He's a snake, stole land from half the widows in Redstone." Kern's jaw clenched. "That's speculation." "Then prove it's not," Eli said. "Show us the warrant." Kern stared at him for a long moment. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat and handed it to Eli. Eli unfolded it and read slowly. His eyes moved down the page, and his expression darkened. Finally, he looked up. "This isn't a warrant," Eli said. "This is a letter from Dockery's lawyer. It's not signed by a judge. It's not notarized. It's nothing." Kern's face flushed. "It's an official request." "It's a lie," Eli interrupted, "and you know it." The men behind Eli murmured in agreement. Kern's hand tightened on his pistol. "You're all making a mistake." No, Eli said, you are. The tensions stretched like a taut wire. And then, from the porch, a voice called out, Sheriff Kern. Everyone turned. Eliza stood in the doorway, me beside her. She held a small leather-bound book in her hands. This is my mother's journal, Eliza said, holding it up. She wrote in it every day until she died. In it, she talks about Samuel Dockery, about how he forced her to sign over the deed to our father's store, about how he threatened to take us away if she didn't. Kern stared at her. She wrote that he told her we'd be sold if she ever spoke up, Eliza continued, her voice shaking but firm. She was too sick to fight him, but she wrote it all down, every word. Eliza stepped forward and handed the journal to Eli. This is proof. He's not our guardian, he's a thief. Eli opened the journal and read the first few pages. His expression hardened. Kern, you need to see this. Kern didn't move. Kern, Eli said again. Finally, Kern stepped forward and took the journal. He read in silence, his face growing paler with each line. When he finished, he closed the journal and looked at Eliza. Why didn't you show this before? Because I didn't think anyone would listen, Eliza said quietly. Kern's hand fell away from his pistol. He turned and looked at the men behind him, then back at Cord. This changes things. I know, Cord said. Kern handed the journal back to Eli. I'll need to take this to the county clerk, get it on record. Eli nodded. I'll go with you. Kern looked at Cord one more time. You're lucky, Brennan. I'm aware. Kern mounted his horse and rode off, the men following him in silence. When they were gone, Eli turned to Cord. You all right? Cord nodded. We're fine. Eli glanced at the girls, then back at Cord. You did a good thing. I did what I should have done 8 years ago. Eli smiled faintly. Better late than never. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Cord alone on the porch with Eliza and me. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Eliza looked up at Cord. Is it over? Cord nodded. It's over. Me tugged on Eliza's sleeve. Can we stay? Eliza looked down at her sister, then at Cord. Can we? Cord knelt down in front of them, his voice steady. You can stay as long as you need. Me smiled a small, fragile smile and stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around Cord's neck and Eliza followed, the three of them standing together on the porch. Cord closed his eyes and held them both. I've got you both, he whispered, always. And for the first time in 8 years, he believed it. Epilogue. 2 years later, Cord stood by the fence line, watching the sun dip below the hills. Behind him, the cabin had grown, a new room, a new porch, enough space for a family. Eliza was in the garden, pulling carrots from the dirt. Me was beside her, laughing at something Eliza had said. Cord smiled. He still thought about that day in the auction yard, about the moment he heard Eliza whisper, Sir, I'll be strong for my sister. He thought about the 8 years he'd lost, the 8 years he couldn't give back. But he also thought about the 2 years since, about the mornings spent teaching me to read, about the evenings spent sitting by the fire with Eliza, listening to her talk about the life she wanted to build. He thought about the way me called him Cord now, without hesitation, about the way Eliza smiled when she saw him coming home. He thought about the way it felt to be someone's family again. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Cord turned and walked back toward the cabin, where Eliza and me were waiting. And the wind carried the sound of their laughter across the valley, soft and sure.